Welcome to the Robert Lewis Sermon Podcast. The following is a session from Men's Fraternity. We hope that you're encouraged in your walk with Christ and enjoy this episode.
Well, I'm glad to have you guys here this morning. This is our third session in Men's Fraternity. I'd like to compare our journey this morning to that of mountain climbing. You know, when we began our adventure together some weeks back, we set up a base camp. And we set our sights on scaling a summit that hopefully would make our life better, make our life more exciting, make our life more satisfying. Now we're 3 weeks into our journey, and I felt like in some ways I've pushed you pretty hard with some of the concepts that we've talked about over the last 3 weeks, and I've suggested that many men are missing the bigger picture of life. And in missing the bigger picture of life, they are also missing the adventures that go with that bigger picture. I've also suggested that many men have traded the thrills of life for more work and for more responsibility. And what we've gotten in that is that we've gotten perhaps success over a period of time, but as you sat in your seat, you began to feel that, well, I've maybe had some success, but I'm not feeling a lot of satisfaction in my life. So the big picture of these first 3 sessions is just simply this. Anyone can make a living. It takes an adventurer to make a life. And life is what we are about in this year's Men's Fraternity called A Man and His Adventure, as we kind of go up this high ascent towards this summit that we want to get to. But like in any serious mountain climb, what you need along the way is some periodic respites along the way. Maybe you felt that, where the air gets a little thinner and the climb gets a little steeper, and for just a moment you need to stop with your team and kind of circle up and rest and reflect and process the journey rather than pushing on and wearing out. And that's what we want to do today, because as I've been in a group and as I've listened to other guys in different groups talk, I kind of feel like some of us are beginning to suck a little air. You know how you do that when you start wearing out? You just kind of start sucking air. And you begin to say to yourself, you know, I'm beginning to get it. I'm beginning to feel it. Okay, Robert, maybe I bought into that half-life manhood that you've talked about. But what do I do about it? Have you felt that way the last couple of weeks? Or maybe you said, you know, I would like a cause. I would like something to live for bigger than myself that would be exciting to me. What is it? Maybe you felt that way. Maybe my job dominates my life, and I'm being asked to do more and more, and I have less and less time for me, my family, or anything else. So what do I do about it? Do I just quit? That seems like maybe a radical idea. And then you talk about fun. I used to have fun years ago. But now even the things I used to do, when I even redo them, fun doesn't feel fun anymore. Have you felt that? Does life for you at different points it begins to kind of feel numb? It doesn't have the edge it used to have. So fun doesn't feel fun anymore. And I mention that because I've heard that from different guys as we've processed together, as we've talked together. And so really what we need is just a moment along the way to pause and to process perhaps what we've been hearing and how we've been interacting rather than pressing on. Bill called it a timeout. I think that's a good way of doing it. Just, you know, you see that in the game. Call timeout. We need to pull over on the side and kind of regroup. And that's what we want to do this morning, to put some practical handles on the raw emotions that we've been feeling. And I think a lot of you have been feeling that. So let's start out by just doing a little bit of review. Look at your outline just for a moment. We focused last week, remember, on those 3 questions, those big, hairy questions of life. And not every man will ever, some men won't ever address these questions. But an adventurer has to address these questions. Here they are. Questions: who am I? The second question: why am I here? The third question: where am I going? Now, we looked at that last week, and we made just some brief statements as we considered the wisdom of Christianity as found in the Scriptures. And we answered the first question by saying, why am I here? I'm here because I'm a man created by God. And we put the accent on created by God. Remember, we said things are never going to be right until we recognize this reality. Things will never be right with life. It's not just I'm a man, but things will never be in sync with my life until I recognize that not only am I a man, but I'm a man created by God. And that can't be a token acknowledgement, guys. That has to be a fundamental, personal reality with you. Now, I don't know where you are spiritually speaking, standing up here looking at a great audience of men, but I just want you to know that cannot be just simply a token acknowledgement of your life. I am a man created by God. Yes, it takes faith to believe that. Yes, it also takes faith not to believe that, to think that I'm some kind of cosmic accident in a universe that's 15 billion light years of desert. That takes faith too. I love what Augustine said right before the Roman Empire fell. He said there's a God-shaped vacuum in every human heart that can only be filled by God. Nothing else can fill that. I'm a man. I'm a man created by God. Secondly, why am I here? We said I am a man commissioned by God. And we talked about 3 adventures that God has commissioned us for in this brief life on planet Earth. We'll talk about those in a moment. And then lastly, where am I going? We said I am a man who will ultimately face God. You know, the Scripture says in the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon says that God has set eternity in our hearts. That's an interesting statement because, you know, you can, if you've traveled widely or you've read anything about history and cultures and people and races, isn't it interesting that from the beginning of time, all over the globe, there's something within the heart of people that urged them to acknowledge that there's an eternity, that this life is not all there is. It's not over when it appears over. There's more than this. And there's something in us that can't let go of that fundamental reality. And the Scripture just simply acknowledges that I am a man who ultimately will face God. Last week we talked about 3 adventures. So if you look on your outline, let's just review those. And we looked at a verse that was kind of fundamental to that. Genesis 1:28. It's up on the top of the screen. You know, as you open up the pages of Scripture, open up the beginning of the Bible, and by the way, Genesis means just that, the beginning or beginnings. So here you are, and you're saying, okay, I want to figure out life, and you would open up the Scripture, and you would begin to read. Right there in the very first chapter, you find this verse that's pregnant with adventure. 3 adventures. I'm going to add a 4th one here today, just because it's so obvious. But the Scripture says, and God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. Now out of that, just that one verse, I believe, are the 4 adventures of man. As you move through the rest of Scripture, as you move through the rest of any individual's life, these 4 adventures become very prominent. They get expanded. Color is put on them, flesh on the bone. The first adventure I mentioned was the family adventure. Remember, you see it there where it says that God said, be fruitful and multiply. We talked about last week that adventure was defined as reproducing life. Life in my children. And hopefully every man here at some point is going to have an opportunity to invest in a child's life. If not your own child, somebody else's child. But hopefully your own child. Your teammate is your wife. The key words to that adventure, and hear me when I say this because these are real important words, is understanding, hands-on involvement, and intimacy. Your goal in that is that when children leave home, and I've always pictured this in my mind, it's your child, they're leaving home. They're going off to school or they're going out in the workplace. When they walk out that door, when they finally pack their bags and their room just simply now becomes a hotel room rather than their room. It's a place they're going to come back and visit from time to time. When they walk out that door and they leave and you shake hands with them or give them a hug or a kiss on the cheek and they drive away. What are they driving away with? That's the adventure. It should have been thought about a long time ago. Not just loving them and attending their activities and things like that, but that you had an understanding of who they are and where they're going to go, and you've been helping them be clear about who they are and what this life is all about, rather than you just hanging around and being a good parent, but then them going out and replicating, if it's in the case of a son, the same half-life manhood that you're not enjoying. Does that make sense to everybody? If you don't give them more, if you don't have a goal for investing in them, an understanding, then you're not really fulfilling this verse. You've produced life, but you've not reproduced real life. And that's what the calling of that verse is. I love I've listed a number of scriptures that you can look up later, but the one I like best is 3 John 4. It's John talking about not his own personal children, it's his spiritual children, but it still applies. He says, I have no greater joy than this, than to see my children walking in the truth. Not that they just had a good job, not that they had just a good marriage, but that my children ultimately became wise and honorable. They were contributors to the world. They're happy. And there's an adventure in all of that. Bill gave away the book Modern Day Night. One of the things that I've put in that book is part of the adventure that me and some other dads got to enjoy with our sons. It was much more than just hanging around. It was an adventure. Secondly is what I call the noble cause adventure. We see that in the phrase, look at the top of the page there, where it says, and subdue the earth. Remember I talked about that word subdue in the Hebrew means fight. Men love a fight. We love it when we're kids. We love it when we're teenagers. We should love it with our men. The question is, fight for what? And I believe it's defined as fighting for a better life and making this world better for others. You'll never fully appreciate who you are and why you are the way you are until you give your life away to others. But that will demand calling and fit and design, understanding all that. But the goal is ultimately to move from success to significance. And for a man, that is a hard transition, but it's the most gratifying one when he makes that. I love what Solomon, we're going to look at a couple of verses from Solomon, but he says this, I know that there is nothing better for a man. That's a pretty strong statement right there, isn't it? I know there is nothing better for a man than to rejoice and to do good in one's lifetime. You know, there's a phrase that men long to hear. I remember in Field of Dreams, remember Doc Gordon, the guy that was the doctor, but he wanted to play baseball. And so he gets a chance to go back and play baseball just for a moment. And then a kid gets something stuck in his throat and he crosses over that line and changes back into the doctor. And all those ball players are standing around. And he helps this little girl get the food that she's choking on out and she's okay. And he stands up now, he's an old man. And he's walking off that Field of Dreams. And just as he does, one of the ball players turns and looks at him and says, Doc, you've done good. Every man longs to hear that about his life. That he's contributed to the betterment of others, and his life was significant. But you can't do that when your life is focused just on you. It has to be focused on others. I call it the noble cause adventure. Then there's that, what I call the man-size adventure. And you know, that's found just in the little phrase, and God blessed them. How did He bless them? He gave them things to enjoy. Gave them, at least in the beginning, this garden and food and plants and animals, and He just wanted to enjoy it. And that's what we need to do, to enjoy life for ourselves. And you know, one of the things I encourage young men right from the beginning is enjoy your life. There's going to be plenty of time for work, but enjoy your life from the very beginning. If you're married, enjoy your life early. When I get the opportunity to marry people, I always tell the young couple, I say, you know, in this first part of the season of your life, 4 kids, make big memories. You're here to enjoy life, not just to put your head down and work. I always tell them the story that when my wife and I were first married, remember I told you I like to travel, and some of you think, but boy, he's been everywhere. What do they pay him here? Well, here's how I've been everywhere. My wife and I got married, and the first year we were married, we took her paycheck from the Fayetteville school system and we put it in the bank. And we did that for 12 straight months and lived off my little salary. And at the end of those 12 months, we took all that money, it was a nice little nest egg, and we went to Europe and to France and to Cyprus and to Egypt. That's how I got on the pyramids. And to the Holy Land. And you know what? We made an incredible memory. That even to this day we look back and laugh and smile about the fun that we had with others. And that's what I'm talking about. Life needs to have those things, and they need to be planned for. They just won't happen. You have to plan for those, but that's part of what life's about. Solomon acknowledges that. Here's what he says: I've seen that there's nothing is better than that man should be happy in his activities. And then the one that I want to add this morning, that's just the obvious one because the whole verse is filled with it, where God is speaking. I just want to add the last one, that there's a spiritual life adventure. And it's found just in the word God, isn't it? That's defined this way: to experience spiritual life. That's what that adventure is. To know that there's more than just what our senses. There's a sixth sense, a spiritual sense, and just our secular senses. It's to experience spiritual life and have more than this life alone can offer. That's what God brings into the equation. He's your teammate. God is the teammate. The key words are faith and love and worship and follow. Those are all part of this spiritual adventure. The outcome, if it's lived rightly for you as a man, if it's more than acknowledgement, if it becomes a true personal engagement with the living God, what it should bring for your life is a peace that's different from this world and the eternal life that Jesus Christ Himself promised. Verse I love that summarizes all is John 10:10. It's where Jesus was speaking to people who were alive, they were working, they had families, they had activities, but Jesus looked into the face of all that and said, listen, that's okay, but I've come that you might have life, at least a more abundant life. I call it value-added life. Life in itself has value, but a spiritual adventure is value-added life. If it's more than just a token acknowledgement, if it becomes a true adventure. Now let me make a bold statement. These 4 adventures that you see right here on the screen, these 4 adventures are what whole life manhood is about. Remember I talked about half-life manhood? The guy that gets out, the young guy who's the warrior, puts his head down, he's going to build a family and a home and a job, and work begins to absorb him, responsibilities get dropped on his shoulders, and the more successful he comes, the more responsibility he gets, until after about half-life, he's worn out. And fun is not fun anymore. And he doesn't have enough time to have any adventure. There's no margin in his life for anything deep. And so when he comes home to be with his kids, rather than having a family adventure, all they get is his frustration and anger at the end of the day. At best. And when he wants to engage in things of life, as I've listened in small groups, he wants to engage, but his mind is preoccupied. And I'm just saying, these 4 adventures is what life is all about. They can be expanded. You can make them unique to you because you're unique. But this is what life's all about in the great adventure. This is what your 70+ years are about if God gives them to you. And if you miss it, you'll be a success, but you won't be satisfied. In balance, these 4 adventures present a manhood that doesn't burn out, a manhood that doesn't wear out, a manhood that's fulfilling and fun. And fun. Let's all say it together. And fun. It's a manhood with a sense of destiny rather than a tired finish when we say, as I've heard other men say, Why is life so long? So, what we want to do is talk about 10 practical perspectives. And I'm going to do it in a kind of a question and answer form because perspective on life is so important. And you've probably heard this story, but it kind of illustrates the point of the young man who gets out and he gets into a company, and it's one of those startup companies that go fast, quick, makes a lot of money, but money consumes him. Money has a way of warping perspective. He makes so much money that now all of life is just gathering more things to himself. Everything else just gets blurred out in the pursuit of things. So he's got his cherry red Ferrari and he's going down the interstate one day, and a guy happens to move over into his lane, runs him off the road. The car flips. He's thrown out. The car rolls down the hill and explodes in flames. Without even thinking, he jumps up and runs over and looks down and just starts going, "My Ferrari, my Ferrari." A guy seeing the accident pulls up alongside and runs out and grabs the guy and says, "Don't you know you're seriously injured? You've lost an arm." The guy looks down and there's just a ragged, torn sleeve with blood running out of it. And he goes, "My Rolex, my Rolex." Now that's a loss of perspective, isn't it? And we laugh at that. But you know, I see guys live like that all the time. It's funny until it's you. And it's real. And life is so out of perspective you can't see anymore. So, what we're going to do is just ask some questions and give some answers just to give us a timeout here. Here's the first one. They're on your outline. You'll fill in a couple of blanks here as we go through just to help you. But first one says this: "These last 2 weeks have surfaced a lot of intense feelings in me." Some of you guys feel that? "I'm not enjoying life as I should. I feel burdened by too much responsibility. I work too much and work consumes too much of me. Life is not an adventure." And I would add, "I'm a real nowhere man, living in my nowhere land. Suddenly there's a shadow hanging over me. I'm not half the man I used to be. So help." How would you answer that? Here's how I'd answer that. First, tension is good for a man at this point. In our journey together, tension is good for a man. Tension is not always bad, and having things not resolved for some of you bottom liners is okay. We need to feel for a moment. And the first couple of weeks is what men's fraternity is about. It's about getting in touch with some of our feelings, because we men oftentimes stuff our feelings, don't we? We put them in this little compartment because we don't want to think about it, but you think they're not going to come out? Are you that naive? You stuff those feelings long enough and life gets frustrating enough, but you don't want to think about who I am, where I'm going, why am I here? You know what happens? Those feelings just erupt. They find a little crevice to sneak out of and explode during your day. Maybe it's somebody's pulled over in front of you and down the freeway and you just start screaming at them. Maybe you just come home and your wife says something to you and you grunt and kick the dog. It could be a lot of ways. Maybe you just get sad or depressed or get fearful. But you don't get rid of those feelings. They go somewhere. So it's good sometimes to feel what we're feeling. And maybe what I've helped you feel in the last few weeks is you're beginning to say, so that's why I feel angry. That's why I feel I'm not enjoying life. I'm making a good living, but I'm not enjoying it like I used to. And so you're getting in touch with the cause of those feelings, and I want you to know that's half the battle. Good for you. It's okay to feel like that. What's left now is just to make some adjustments. Some of those could be major adjustments for you. Some of those could be minor adjustments for you. If you play golf, you know sometimes just a minor adjustment makes a huge difference in your golf game. Might be in how you grip it, might be in how you follow through. It can be different things, but just a minor adjustment sometimes can change your whole life. I was asked one time by a consultant, said, "Robert, what's one thing that you could do that would improve your life 50%? Just one thing." I started thinking about that. You know, there are things like that. So for some of you, I want you to know, we're at a place where you maybe are getting in touch with some of the things that you need to get in touch with feeling-wise. Don't have the answers yet, but it's okay to have those kind of intense feelings. What you need is time and patience to discover, do I need to make a major adjustment, or do I just need to change my grip a little bit? And we'll do that over the next few weeks as we're together. The other thing that we're going to give you in here, which every man needs from a group of men, is permission to make those changes. Sometimes it's good to look at a group of guys or your friends and say, I need to change my job. And have them look back and say, yeah, you sure do. You have permission. Do it. Second question. You said last week our work is to be a means to these three adventures, not an end to them. Can you elaborate? Well, I'll just put it in this perspective. My daughter, a number of years ago when she finished college, she went to work for a consulting company here in the United States. And by working with this consultant company, she would travel night and day, work 80-hour weeks. Then they transferred her to Europe, and her life totally changed because European lifestyles are different. And when she was back at Christmas, just in a conversation, she made this statement that I thought was real interesting. Just kind of a summary. She said, Dad, here's what I've learned about living in America and living in Europe. In America, Americans live to work. In Europe, Europeans work to live. Now, the question is this: which one would the Scriptures support? Well, let's just look real quick at three Scriptures. Here's the first one. Ecclesiastes. I've seen that nothing is better than that man should be happy in his activities. Here's the second one. Enjoy life with the woman whom you love all the days of your fleeting life which He has given to you under the sun. For this is your reward in life, and in your toil in which you have labored under the sun. Then thirdly, in Ecclesiastes 5:18. Here's what I've seen to be good and fitting: to eat, to drink, to enjoy oneself and all one's labor in which he toils under the sun during the few years of his life which God has given him. For this is his reward. So if Solomon were here, would he say, you work to live or live to work? Which is it? I think he would say, you work to live. And our work should help us live an adventure rather than be the reason we rarely have one. And we have got to come to terms with that. Third question. When is men's fraternity going to help me find my adventure? I want an adventure. And if you're a type A, you really want it now. Give it to me now. Bottom line, give me 3 things and I won't have to go the rest of the year. Well, I wish it was that easy. But real life doesn't work that way. Real life is a process. It's an unfolding. And what you need here is you need some language to be a part of that process. You need to have language like half-life and whole life, manhood and process and those kind of things. And what the adventures are. You need a language to begin to explore your cause. You need to learn about yourself. You need to learn about the bigger drama that's going on around you. You need to research. You need to explore. It'd be good for you, as one man suggested to me, that you create your own personal board. 2 or 3 guys that are not yes men, that could look you straight in the face and say, this is who you are. This is what you're gifted at. This is when we see you excited. Wouldn't that be great to have? And the only agenda they have is they love you. And they look you square in the face and say, no. This is who you are. And we all see it. Everybody sees it. Why can't you see it? Because when you begin to get that kind of information and research and understanding about who you are and what motivates you, it's that begins to move you to what you need to invest your life in as far as a cause. So we're going to be together talking about this, and if you stick with us these 20 plus weeks, you'll begin to gather enough data and research and design and understanding that I think you'll be able to name your adventure as far as a cause, or at least begin to explore it. Explore the field you should be in. So hang with us. Fourth, how do you make your family an adventure? Mine feels more like a grind. Where is the adventure in family? We could spend days talking about this. I'm just going to give you a couple of thoughts. First and foremost, stay in love with your wife. And secondly, stay in touch with your wife. When you're in sync with your wife, 99% of the time, marriage stays an adventure. You get out of sync, you get out of the flow, you get out of touch or out of love, and family becomes a burden. 2 just really quick tips. We can talk about this later, but 2 quick tips. I think every man needs to understand from the time he gets married till the time he dies, you need regular time with your wife alone. Regular time alone. And that gets harder when the job gets harder and when kids come along. But I would recommend, I've said this for years, if you were in Men's Fraternity 1, I've said it, you need, if nothing else, every quarter, just get away for the weekend with your wife without the kids. If nothing else, that just recaptures why you got married. You get a lot of time to communicate, and that is so helpful because it keeps you together. And if you stay together, then that creates the adventure because you'll stay in love and you'll stay in touch. Secondly, you need to have in your family a common direction. And so that's going to require some dialogue, especially about 3 things: kids, money, and career. Because sometimes you may be feeling like you're doing good and bringing home a lot of money, but if you really got in touch with your wife, she said, honey, I don't want you to have this job. It's killing our family. Stay in touch and stay in love. Next question, how do I find things that make me come alive? How do I find those things that make me come alive? Isn't that a great question? Wouldn't you like to have more life? It's a great question. And rather than just me answering, I'm going to ask Bill Wellens, who's going to be your instructor for a part of the second half of Men's Fraternity, come up and tell us about a tool that we're going to let you participate in that will help you find the things that help you come alive. So Bill, welcome, man.
Hey, man.
It's good to have you here.
It's good to be here.
Why don't you tell us about Servants by Design and what it is?
Okay, well, Servants by Design, really, in terms of what we're talking about here, I think we could call it almost manhood by design. I think it's going to have that kind of impact. It's a tool that at its core was designed by Dr. Taby Kaler. It's been researched for over 30 years. Over 500,000 people worldwide have used it, but I think the thing that kind of sold me on it, Robert, was I discovered it's the instrument that's used to determine which astronauts go to the moon. And so I figured, well, if it could help an astronaut, which one, the selection process go to the moon, it could certainly help me find my passion.
Yeah.
And so in terms of investigating tools and all, I found it to be absolutely the best one that's out there.
So when we get to that part in Men's Fraternity, how many weeks will you help us with that?
Well, you know, it's new to Men's Fraternity 3, but I feel like the process, and you used that word this morning, it's really good, will be about 6 to 8 weeks. And I think guys will really get a far deeper appreciation for their unique design that you've already spoken to as a result of that.
Now, let's say I've taken that personal inventory that you have in Discover Your Design, which we'll take, and I'm finished. It's all finished. You've been with us those weeks, and I'm wrapping it up and I'm walking out. What am I going to have?
Well, I knew that you were going to ask me that question. And so what I did this morning is I brought the printout. You'll get a printout as a result from taking the inventory, and I brought mine this morning because it's been invaluable to me in terms of really confirming and affirming certain strengths, abilities, what motivates me, what makes me come alive. You've used that terminology. What energizes me, areas of passion. So I've got just a few things. We have time to just read a couple of things. Sure. One of the things it talks about is subject matter, and for me that happens to be people and data. And but then it goes further than that. And so here's some things like with data, the test, the results of my test said, well, you're really good at synthesizing and theorizing related to data, coordinating and planning, analyzing and evaluating. So it gets more detailed. In terms of people, it said my strengths are with regard to mentoring, advising, counseling, negotiating, cooperative decision making, instruction, teaching, so forth and so on. And then it goes on and breaks down those abilities in even more detail. It talks about the setting that I work best in, the environment, how I see people, how they see me. It's really an outstanding information.
And so as I get that information, I'm going to understand what brings me alive.
Yeah, it's going to give you a much better summary of the real you.
Okay.
And the things that you're passionate about.
Okay. Now, in order to go through that information that you're going to provide for us in January, I've got to take a personal inventory earlier than that. Can you tell the guys about that?
Yeah, what we'd like to do is we'd like to make the inventory available to all of you on November the 7th and November the 14th here at Men's Fraternity so you can pick it up. And then we're going to give you a couple of weeks, so we'd like you to turn it back in on November the 28th. You can just turn it in here.
So I'm going to take that. Then I come back in January. You're going to help me process that over a number of weeks, 6 to 8 weeks.
That's right.
And then when I finish, what I'm going to have is a good understanding of who I am, what motivates me in life, where I can plug that design into certain settings generally to understand what brings me alive.
Absolutely.
That's pretty good stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thanks, Bill.
Look forward
I appreciate
to it.
it. Okay. I want to tell you, I've been through that information, and it really does exactly what Bill said. And just even him reading some of those things about who he is, he's a mentor and a coach. And you know, bringing Bill alive was discovering that about himself and then plugging into young men and young pastors. And that energizes him. It's finding places that when you involve yourself in those places, you feel yourself gaining energy. Rather than plugging into places, and when you finish, you're so glad that's over because it's drained the energy out of you. But to do that, you've got to discover in a more articulate way to yourself what your design is. And that's what this is all about. Next question. I'd like to have a cause to live for. How do I go about finding one? By the way, I just want to mention that for some men, eventually their job becomes their cause. A job sometimes can be a fit where it can also be how I earn my living, but it also can be my cause. For many other men, their job is not going to be necessarily related to their cause. But here's what I can tell you, just in a broad outline as we process together. To have a cause in life, one that energizes you and will carry you to the end of your life so you're still involved and excited about who you are, you're going to need 3 things. The thing that Bill mentioned down here, if we could go down to this end, it's going to be my design. You have got to know who you are and how God has wired you. You've got to have a good handle on that, because if you don't have that, it's like trying to turn on a light without plugging it in. This is your wiring. And you've got to know who you are. So we've got to establish that. On the other end, if the Scriptures are right, the other thing we know about cause is it's going to help others. Okay, so that's the other given. So down on this end is my design, down on this end, that how I use that design is going to benefit and contribute to others. Then the third thing is what's in the middle. And you can just put in the middle will be 3 things: time, experimentation, and seasonal opportunities. Because you take your design, and over time and with certain opportunities, you'll plug into different places. Some of those will work, some of those won't. But over time, and if you're lucky, it'll happen the first time, but a lot of times it doesn't. But over time, you'll discover things that every time you do it, you love it. You love it. And after a while, that becomes your cause. That's where you can make your greatest contribution. And whether you retire, you would never stop doing this because it gives you energy. The thing that kills people in retirement is it's self-focused. You know, I'm going to finish and do all this for me. Yeah. And how long is that going to last? But if you've discovered your design in helping people, that energy that you gain will last for a lifetime. They'll be putting you in the grave and you'll still be wanting to do it. That's what we're talking about when we talk about cause. Next question. How can I find some man-sized adventures to put fun back in my life? That's a good question, isn't it? For you young men, you don't need an answer to that question, because young men just naturally do fun things. They really do. They're going to come up with some crazy stuff to do, and life is brand new. But here's what I want you to know. The older you get, fun becomes a reinvention of yourself. And the reason older men quit having fun is because they don't make the adjustment what was fun when they were young to what needs to be fun when they're old. They can't go back to this, so they long for it. So what they do is they make the big mistake. Rather than being a participant in life, they become a passive watcher of life. See, when you're young, you get a group of guys, let's go play pickup basketball, and we go beat the crud out of each other and have a great time. But as you get older, you go out there and they beat the crud out of you and you can't walk for the next week. Right? So you know what you do? You quit having fun and you take that time and you go in and turn the television on and watch others have fun. That's not a way to live. See, you come to a place where as you get older, you're going to have to do some things. You're going to have to reinvent a new level of fun. One of the good things about getting older and kind of getting established is sometimes you can invest more in it, you can plan more, you can do grander things. But they've got to be thought out. When you're young, you could learn to fly. When you get older, maybe you build your own airplane. That'd be fun with a group of guys. I know with my son, one of the things he wanted to do when he's young is he wanted to go to every SEC stadium and experience it. You know, but what he and I have talked about as he gets older, I said, why don't we go together to every great sporting event? Super Bowl, the World Series. We've already been, he and I, to the Tour de France. That was great, standing there in Paris and watching Indurain, the guy who's won more Tour de France, finish. There we were. Together. That's an adventure. That's what we're talking about. But you're going to have to invest thinking about what fun is for you at a different level. And then get participants, friends, to join with you. Next question. I'm in a job. I'm doing good. I'm making good money, but I just don't like what I do. I'm going through the motions and I hate it. I hate that. What should I do? Well, here just for a moment, we're not going to answer all the questions, but we can give some general directions. One of three things you can do. First, you can ask yourself, am I expecting too much out of my job? What happens is guys go into a job thinking it's going to give them everything. And the reason they start going through the motions, they thought the job was going to give them life. No job is going to give you life. That's why they call it work. Okay? Now, you may find life somehow in that work, bigger life, but maybe you're expecting too much. And sometimes that is a problem. Secondly, maybe if you're going through the motions, you just need to seek adjustments in your job. And what I mean by that is maybe you're misplaced, misaligned. The things that you're really good at, you're not doing, and the things you're not so good at, they're asking you to do. And maybe you need to take a courageous step and just go meet with your employer. Some guys say, I couldn't do that. Well, why not? This is an adventure. Maybe talk to him. Maybe say, this is what I'm really good at. Tell him what really excites you, where you can make your greatest contribution. Maybe he'll make an alteration. You could do that. I talked to a doctor one time who the one thing he didn't like about his job was he worked all the time. Never any time to himself. We sat down at lunch one day and I said, well, why can't you talk to your partners about you don't want to work all the time? Oh, they would run me off. I said, have you talked to them? No. I said, well, can't we just at least try that? He said, yeah. So he went to his partners and sat down with them and said, listen, you know, we're all partners here. We all work the same hours. That's how we divide the money up equally. Here's what I want. I want half the money that I'm making right now, if you'll let me go home at X time. Give me permission. And if you don't like that, that's fine. I understand that. They all came back to him and said, if you want to do it that way, that's fine with us. See, I'm just saying, it's an adventure. The other thing, of course, is you can quit your job. You know, you can say, this isn't working for me, and it's just the courage to make a change in your job. One wife wrote me this letter after a message I gave. She said, I've been looking at my husband. And I've been asking the question, do you want to stay status quo in your life, or are you willing to take steps of faith to reach the summit? Over the last 5 years, I've seen a major change in my husband. God was moving him from his head to his heart concerning who he was and what gave him life. He had glimpses of the unique design God had created him for over the years, but all too often, these were never given time to fully develop because of the schedule demands of his job. For a wife, waiting is especially difficult when we see often more clearly than our husband the unique design God has given them. Often we are the only truth cheerleader in their life. It is an intense struggle to keep cheering when it looks like the game is over, no progress is being made, and we will never experience more of the life God intended for us. However, today it's a thrill to watch my husband in his new job, realizing he is living the life God dreamed for him and intended for him. For the first time, he's truly himself, not conforming to another ideal of somebody else. He is experiencing God's pleasure, doing what he was designed and created to do, and it's been an amazing blessing to our entire family. Sometimes guys just need the courage to change. Maybe that's the major move for you. But that's some suggestions that I would give. Next question. I'm a young man just getting started. Life seems exciting enough to me now. How can I avoid ending up where you old guys seem to be? I'll just mention 3 things real quickly because we're out of time. I'm going to cover these last 2 real quick. Here's the way I'd answer that. First, be realistic about yourself. If I could give you one piece of advice, be realistic about yourself, and here's what that means. Know who you are and know who you're not. In fact, what I'm learning about young men as I consult with them is helping them understand who they're not is even more important than helping them understand who they are. Because they will chase fanciful dreams and end up in dead ends, and they will waste time. That goes back to this design that we'll be looking at with Bill Wellens here later on. You must know who you are and know who you're not. Secondly, for you young guys, I would just encourage you to listen to wisdom from men who have lived well. That's pretty easy. Find best practices. We do that in companies, but find men who are what I call best practices. Older men who seem to have lived in balance and adventure and lived well, and go interview them. Ask them how they got there, what critical moves they make, where the pressure points will be. That's just such a wise little adjustment. Then lastly, I would say, take God seriously. Take God seriously. Trust what God's Word says. Seriously. Seriously. I like what Solomon says. We looked at some verses from Solomon, but I like what he said at the end of Ecclesiastes, that wisdom book. Listen, because he speaks to young men. He says this, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come, and you say, I have no delight in them. Take God's Word seriously. Last thing I want to mention, then I'll close. How religious are we going to be here? Because some of you guys are coming and maybe you don't have a church background. Maybe you're not even in the Christian faith. You're of some other faith, or you just came in here and you just wonder, well, where are we going to go in this? Because he's using the Bible. I want to be honest, real clear to everybody. I hate religion. I hate it. It makes people prideful, arrogant, and unhealthy. And anytime anybody enters into the spiritual adventure, you can always go off the curb into the ditch of religion. And when you're there, you're worse than you were when you were on the highway of life. That's why Jesus Christ, when he was here on the earth, the people he fought with the most were the religious people. And that's a hard road to navigate. But I just want you to know where I'm coming from. Second thing I want you to know is I've observed that there are men here who've had a bad experience with religion or church or some, quote, Christian growing up, and they've let that one moment become a universal proclamation of what every spiritual statement is all about. So because they had a bad experience in a church when they were growing up, when they were young or whatever, now all churches, all organized religion, everything is just, I've seen that. Now let me ask you this. If you'd had a bad meal, would you quit eating? Would you make a universal declaration? If the Razorbacks lost their opener, would you go give up your season tickets? Maybe if they lost 2 or 3, you would. But not the opener. And my appeal to you then, why would you make a universal declaration because of one moment in your life? Maybe there is healthy spiritual life out there and you just hadn't found it yet. Here's the 2 things I'm going to promise you. I'm not going to cram my religion down your throat. I am going to use the Scriptures and you can read them for yourself. That's all we're going to do. Just going to give that because I think there's wisdom there. But I will offer that. But on the other hand, don't let your bad spiritual experience, if you've had one, cause you to miss out on what may be offered here. Well, our time is over. We got a timeout. We've had enough for one day. Next week, we're going to pick up our gear and continue the climb upward. We just paused to process today a little bit. Next week, we'll continue the climb up the mountain of the great adventure.
Thank you for listening to this week's message. It really helps us when you rate and review this podcast. If you found today's teaching helpful, take time to do that today. This podcast was produced by the team at Sound of a Rose. Visit soundofarose.com for any of your podcasting needs.